Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
What a pleasure.
Hello.
We're
All right.
here. This is my mom. And I'm Nathan, and so we're doing 4 of these hostings, and we were at soundcheck earlier, and we looked to each other, and we said, what are we supposed to do? We said, we have no idea. So here we are. We're really, really excited that you are here for this grand experiment for us.
I think we should get on with it.
Yeah, enough talking. The rest of the show is actually really wonderful. Our storytellers are fantastic. Become a little family in the last couple of weeks. I love it. But first, to introduce your first storyteller.
I'm just going to fuss here for a while. Okay.
Sharron Cohen. I'm going to clear that mic, actually, because of the framing.
Oh, okay.
Sharron Cohen has had a checkered career as an Air Force officer, physical therapist, shopkeeper, school library aide, bookmobile librarian, and writer. And an equally checkered volunteer life as a photographer, researcher, genealogist, reading mentor, lighthouse keeper, and grandmother. When asked what she does...
You want me to say it?
So she wrote this. And I think I'd like to say it because what it says is, when asked what she does, she is likely to answer, whatever I like. Is that what you meant?
No.
The mic is yours. Sharron Cohen.
All right. I'm just going to fool around with this for just a minute. Can you hear me? Okay. Many, many years ago, my son, that one over there, was an adolescent. He was a good kid, but he was still a teenager. And we had issues. And primary among the issues was the time he got in at night. He didn't have a curfew per se, but we expected him to make good choices about when he was going to leave an event. And we particularly expected him to let us know if he was going to be in later than we expected him to be in. Let me repeat, I had a teenager. So his idea of good choices and my idea of good choices were not always aligned. There were nights when I sat listening to the clock ticking, when I imagined every conceivable thing that could be out there bumping around in the night with my teenage son. And there were nights when time lengthened to a point where my brain bifurcated and did that parental dialogue. And I think you know what it is. One half of my brain would say, "My baby's in a ditch. Oh my God, my baby." And the other half of my brain would say, if that little shit doesn't get in soon. And then Nathan would come la-di-dying in. And he'd say some version of, "What? I was at Matt's house playing Dungeons and Dragons. Don't you trust me?" Because for him, the conversation was always about rules and authority and trust. And for me, the conversation was about love and the fear of loss. And as many times as we had that conversation, I was never able to connect those 2 points of view. But if my teenage son was incapable of understanding how I felt, there were people who did. And that was brought home to me one night when I was waiting up for Nathan and his friend Nick, who was spending the summer with us, to get in from a neighborhood party. I had fallen asleep on the couch. I was shaken awake. I woke up, I opened my eyes to my son's face about here, and he said, "Mom, everything is okay." I know why you laughed. You laughed because you know that something always follows that sentence. And that night, what followed that sentence was, "There's a policeman outside who'd like to speak to you." The police officer who had brought Nathan and Nick home, excuse me, who brought Nathan and Nick home, had sent Nathan into the house to get me because he understood what my reaction was going to be if I answered a midnight knock on the door and saw a police officer illuminated in the overhead light filling up the window at my door. And he understood that because he had a son exactly the same age as Nathan, in exactly the same grade, in exactly the same high school. So I stepped outside. I was prepared to hear the words vandalism, restitution, arraignment, juvenile record. But what the nice policeman wanted to talk about was whether my son knew his son and his son knew my son and what classes was he taking and who his teachers were and what did I think of the high school. It was a confusing conversation, especially given the context. It was the dead of night. The two boys were bouncing up and down like they had overactive imaginations, or bladders, or both. This was a police officer, crisply creased, standing in front of a cruiser in my driveway, and I was barefoot on my back stoop, wrapped in my purple, puffy penguin bathrobe. And if there wasn't exactly an imbalance of authority, there was certainly an imbalance of dignity here. I tried to remedy that by occasionally saying things like, "All right, boys, it's time to be in for the night," which sounded every bit as lame then as it does now. And the nice police officer kept on talking as if we were at a social event, and I kept on nodding because I wasn't hearing those words. And finally, he said goodbye, got in his cruiser, and drove into the night. I opened my kitchen door. The two boys tumbled in, absolutely giddy, because it turns out that being driven around the block in a police cruiser is the ultimate field trip. Back in the day, when my son was an adolescent, he loved the night. He loved walking in it. He loved the sensation of melting into the darkness. And now that he's an adult, he takes his own children out for night walks. He reminded me then, and he reminds me still, that there is very little to fear in the night, particularly compared to all the wonderful pleasures in the night. And he is absolutely right. But I'm a mother. I will always be a mother. And the most wonderful thing that goes bump in the night is the sound of a door closing with my son on the inside of it, alive, unharmed, and unarraigned for another day. Thank you. Our next storyteller is John Christie. John started his journalism career as a reporter for the Gloucester Daily Times back in the 1970s, then went on to be an editor and publisher for newspapers in Florida and Maine. After retirement, he and his wife Naomi, who's also a journalist, co-founded the Maine Center for Public Interest Reporting. He has recently published a memoir called The Prince of Wentworth Street, An American Boyhood in the Shadow of the Armenian Genocide. And coming full circle, he moved back to Gloucester 6 years ago and is currently working with the Cape Ann Museum to mount a retrospective of Charlie Lowe's photographic work for the Gloucester Times. John.
Thank you, Sharron, and thank you for keeping both of those boys safe. Nathan and Nick, who happens to be my son. I had no idea what he was doing up here in Lanesville, but I knew he was having a good time. The time is the early mid-1960s. It's Halloween. The place is a mill town about an hour from here, just about the size of Gloucester. And I belong to a gang. Not that kind of gang exactly, not a criminal gang, not a violent gang, not a drunk gang. Matter of fact, it's really 60s, we didn't know any drugs. And we didn't get into too much trouble if you don't count the motorcycle we decided was abandoned and we should take for ourselves, or the telephone poles we needed to build our basketball court on the side of the street that actually belonged to the telephone company. We were led by a young man by the name of Mac, a Yankee, very lanky fellow who had a very rebellious streak. Even though he was the smartest kid in his high school, he also was a very irreverent fellow. He was the kind of guy who would walk down the street, see Mr. Respectability wearing a hat, knock the hat off his head, run away with it. The next day, put the hat on his head, find the guy again, return it with a smile and a flip of the hat. Mac would have a notion. He would say, come to my house, we're going to go to plan. And around that time, the local radio station had a club. It's called Club 96. Why did they call it Club 96? Club 96 was the 96% of the good kids in town. And they were the 4%. We didn't think we were the 96%. We knew we weren't, but we weren't 4% either. We weren't hoodlums. We weren't punks. We were a different kind of 4%. The 4% who would just as soon poke an eye out of somebody who said they were part of the 96%. And that year, Club 96 had a plan for one of their big events. It was a dance at City Hall in our town. And they went on the radio and said, announced the plan for the dance, and they said, the winners of the dance this year, we were riding around a car, so I heard this on the radio, will win the biggest pumpkin in the state of New Hampshire. This is happening in New Hampshire. And we're listening to that, and Mac said, I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen. I've got a plan, so come to my house tonight. And we all gathered together at his house, and sitting around at his living room were his gang, all of us, and his mother, who we call Mrs. Mac. Well, Mrs. Mac was very much like her son, an Irish lady with a twinkle in her eye, and a person who likes mayhem and excitement and irreverence as next as anybody does. So Mac said, listen, here's the idea, guys. We're going to go to City Hall, and we're going to get that pumpkin. This is how we're going to do it. You two guys, he pointed to me. My nickname was Boris. That's another story from the time. And another fellow named Minnie. Back then, everybody had nicknames, by the way. And he said, you two guys are going to go up, and there's going to be a cop at the door at the dance, and you're going to create a diversion, so he won't know what's going on. And two other guys, Chev and Cricket, you guys are going to go up to the stage and create another diversion for the DJ, so he doesn't know what's going on. And my mother will drive the rest of us to City Hall in her car, her green Chevrolet, and myself and my middle brother, when this is all happening, we'll run up to the stage and we'll get the pumpkin. That was the plan. So that night, we all gone to City Hall. City Hall, very imposing place in my hometown. Big marble columns, big granite steps. The kind of place that reeks authority, and we didn't care for authority. So we're in front, Minnie and I are at the entrance where the cop is there, and it's not a cop we know, so a little concerned. And actually, I'm kind of nervous because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to have my mother be worrying about things like the mother worried about, and get into sort of trouble and be grounded again. So I'm standing there waiting for something to happen. We've got this all timed pretty well. And Minnie says to me, who are you looking at, Boris? And I didn't realize it was starting already. He pushes me, and I push him, and we start hassling each other and fighting and having a sort of phony fight, but not that phony, on the marble floor. two guys, get out of here. And we run down the stairs, and we're running back home, and we don't know what's quite happening at all. And as we're running back to the McInerney's house, the Mac's house up the street about a mile, the green Chevrolet rides by very fast, tooting the horn, and the daughter in the family, Barbara, waves and whoops and yells and screams, and they run back, they drive back to the house, and Minnie and I run back, and we expect we're all going to be in there and see what happened. And we thought they'd be excited and talking about the event, and they weren't. They're all very quiet. But over in the corner was a huge pumpkin. And on top of that pumpkin was the youngest son of the family, a guy we call Kevbo, sitting on the like a big, huge orange chair. And nobody's saying a word, and the radio is on. And we're listening to the results of the dance contest. And the DJ comes on and says, now, here's the winners of the dance contest. It's Cindy and Ricky. Well, we knew Cindy and Ricky. Ricky was a kid who always wore a bow tie to school. And Cindy was a girl from the neighborhood who was happily not part of the 96%, but they didn't apparently know that. And we're listening very carefully, and the DJ says, okay, call him up here to give him the big pumpkin. And he says, and Max says, be quiet. And he says, wait a minute. We can't find the pumpkin. Where is it? And Max says, everybody be quiet. And he says, what happened to the pumpkin? We don't know where it is. Well, we'll give it to you later. And at that point, Mrs. Mack says, well, you guys are really crazy. And in my hometown, that night is still known as the night Mrs. Mack drove the getaway car. Thank you.
That's John Christie. Thank you. Next, we have Nikki Richon Schoel, who is a lifelong resident of Cape Ann, a gardener, mother, sister, and grandmother, a feminist, community activist, writer, and a fierce advocate for survivors of trauma and abuse. She's a therapist in private practice here in Gloucester who believes we are all deeply connected through the power of our stories. Nikki.
Thank you. Good evening. When you're talking about things that go bump in the night, there is nothing quite like bats. You can't beat bats at bumping in the night. Bats are those little fuzzy, gnarly-faced, hairy little creatures who come out at the crepuscular hour, just between dusk and light. And they make little squeaky, squeaky sounds as they fly around. They can fly 100 miles an hour, and they can detect a single human hair using their echolocation. In 1970, my first husband, Dan, and I left our home in Lyme, New Hampshire, and moved to Plymouth, Massachusetts to live in his father's house on Boot Pond. It was one of our really deeply beloved places. It was a magical place for us. We had come to the point of realizing that our marriage was over, but we also weren't quite ready to let go. So we decided to spend a month together in this special place. It was right on Boot Pond, which is just a beautiful heavenly spot. And we spent our days gardening and cooking, learning about herbs and flowers and the stars. And in the evening, I would glide on my back in Boot Pond just at dusk with the bats flitting all around me looking for insects. And I would just glide through the pink-petaled sabbatia and the yellow bullhead lily and the pickerel weed. And we had decided, we turned down the offer of the guest room in Dan's father's house and opted for the barn. And it's a beautiful barn built in, I think, 1850, and we set up a sleeping place up in the loft and had a little table and blankets and a mattress. And the first night we spent there, it was fine. We slept really well. We did very well there, but soon we realized that we were not alone. there was just a little something moving around by my feet. Like a little scruffly something moving around. And we shined the light, and it was a little line of bats. And they were all together in a line, and they seemed to be going kind of like this. And I half expected one of them to pull out a ukulele. But we finally learned to live with them. And, one morning I got up and climbed up, put up a ladder and climbed way up into the hayloft. And sure enough, there are hundreds of bats hanging upside down, little piles of guano everywhere in the loft. I believe to this day that those bats appeared to help my husband Dan and I make it through the last dark corridors of our marriage. A few years after that, I moved to Williamsville, to a house on Woodbury Street, and I was renting it. I was really excited about spending my first night there, and so even before the electricity was turned on, I went up with my flashlights and some blankets, and my scraggy-haired, bearded, soon-to-be husband, Jim, helped me get it all set up, and I also brought my cat, Bosco, my black cat, Bosco. And so we settled in, and we were in a deep sleep when I heard something. And it sounded like your worst nightmare of something that was going to happen in the night, like a dark, sort of feathery, whooshy, groaning, snarling thing. And I turned on my flashlight, and Bosco had a bat in his mouth. And I was like, I was trying to go through the Rolodex of dusty knowledge, like what do you do when your cat catches a bat? But I didn't know, so I thought I'm standing there going, well, should I grab the bat? No. So then I finally decided I'm going to pick the cat up by its tail. So I picked it up by its tail, and I went, wow, like that, and dropped the bat. So I then scooped a book and got him into an empty box, flapped it shut, and ran outside where it was a night like tonight, except colder and windier, like just a perfect Halloween night. And this was the night before Halloween that all of these shenanigans were happening. So I ran outside, and I dumped the bat alongside the garage. I could see he got out, but I couldn't tell if he was okay. He just kind of, didn't look great. But I ran back in. I was, totally freaked out. And I didn't really go back to sleep because all I could picture was, blood-fanged vampire things flying around the room. And the next morning, I got up and I thought, maybe I should call a vet, just 'cause, And so I called the vet and said, my cat bit a bat. What should I do? And the vet said, is the bat still alive? And I said, I don't know. I'll go look for it. So I went out and went along the garage again and looked around, looked in the piles of leaves, no bat. I went back in and called the vet back and said, I can't find the bat. Why do I need the bat? And he said, well, because in order to determine if it's rabid, we need some tissue. So if you do find him, you should cut off his head. And I just speechless, obviously. Cut off its head? And then I thought to myself, well, you are never going to catch this person cutting off a head on Halloween, no matter what. Just not happening. So I did have to put Bosco in quarantine. And many years later, I have lived in that house for 50 years. I have now lived in that house for 50 years with my husband and my children. 5 months ago, my husband died. But now, I go out in the backyard, and my granddaughter and I take tiny, tiny little pebbles the size of insects and toss them up into the air to summon our ambassadors from the threshold. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Our next storyteller is Les Bartlett, Les spent more than 30 years performing with Le Grand David at the Cabot Theater in Beverly, which included 9 performances at the White House. He is a photographer whose works have been exhibited at the Cape Ann Museum, an historian whose research will appear in his forthcoming book, Break, Stonewater Heart, The Culture of Cape Ann Granite. He has also researched the history and lore of Dogtown and has come tonight to tell one of the legends he finds most personally resonant. Les.
This okay? Everybody can hear me? You know, I have to take a moment and say for all of you here that we as Gloucester are the things that bump very well in the night. Truly. So, but this is a story I have to tell barefoot, okay? And there'll be a reason and a key moment for why I'm barefoot. And of course, it's the story of Dogtown. Because I've always wondered, how is it possible that people settle for Dogtown? If you were to take the heart of Cape Ann out, put it on the ground, because it wasn't known as the heart of Cape Ann. Well, dogs, animals will come and they'll take a piece. It's my Dogtown because I walk. It's my Dogtown because I talk. I'm local, I'm vocal, I want it left alone. Don't move it, don't remove it. Leave the green cat briar where it is, it's fine. It's even been stalked by murder. But we walk it, we talk it, all these pieces. So what is the piece that I am dogged about? It's about a Dogtown before it's Dogtown, when it was in fact the heart and the uplands of Cape Ann. So this is just a little historic story tonight, because we know narratives, we know how stories get told. We know the debate between what's fake and what's real. There's one page on Cape Ann that describes the occurrence of how witches emerge in Dogtown. And let's face it, whatever which way you want the witch, witches are a pretty big deal. So here's the fact. The first settlers who settled in Dogtown, before the Revolution, the men stand back and look down to see at the shore if it's safe to go to fish, to go to daily work. They go from there down to here and return. And if they're fishermen, they happen to bring the fish back at night for the women to cook. And life was tough in Dogtown, and the women would cook in the pot and share the fish with their neighbors. Well, this is all well and said and good until the time of the American Revolution, when many of the men go and they don't come back. And so now we say, well, what is this thing about Dogtown? How does it get its name? And the answer is, well, you know, after the Revolution, the women were alone, and the dogs were there, and they howled. It wasn't the dogs that howled. It was the nor'easters from Ipswich Bay coming up over unhampered, through Plum Cove, through the dunes, across the moraine, before the Babson boulders were born, crossing down into Gloucester, a howl. And the children joined in the howl. So here's the story, written by Ebenezer Poole of Rockport. Thomasina Younger walks from Fox Hill. She comes to fetch fish from the fishermen and the captains of the boats at the harbor. She walks barefoot. One pair of shoes that would only be worn to go to church, not to go to catch fish, not to fetch fish. So Thomasina comes down and she sees James Poole sitting at the dock dressing fish. And she wants to be polite. She's hungry. And she says, "Please, sir, may I have some fish for my children?" She has no money. She is begging. And James says, go away. Just go away, will you? I need to attend to what I'm doing. And so Thomasina turns and walks barefoot back up into Dogtown. Dirt road, splintered wood, cold feet. She comes back the next day and she says, James, please, I need some fish. Would you give me some? And he says, get away from me, you old wretch. Go away. And so Thomasina leaves again. She comes back a third day, and she's really tired of this. She says, James, I need fish. I need to cook for my children. I need to cook for my neighbor's children. And he says, go away. And so Thomasina turns. And James says, just get out of here, you old witch. And at that moment, Thomasina is Tammy Young. And she looks back and she says, if you don't give me any fish, something's going to happen to you. Something always happens to us. And he says, get away. And so she goes. James goes out on the boat with his men to the ground of fish plenty. Plenty of fish. They fill the boat, and the anchor breaks. And he needs to beat it back to Gloucester Harbor for repairs. He says, men, if she comes back again, give her fish, because something happened. So they go out, she comes back, and by this time she has a snarl on her face. Her feet are dirty. They're broken skin from walking so much. She doesn't say a word. And James holds out his arm filled with fish. She takes it and she says, I think good things are going to happen for you from now on. Well, this is one of many stories that have occurred, an accounting of the curses, the charms that turn to curses, of women who come to beg and fetch for fish at Gloucester Harbor and who are turned away. And the stories are created by all those families that live on the shore, that have the fine houses, that have left Dogtown, that have gone down and keep the windows open to the ocean, to create and watch the men going out to bring the fish back. But for the windows at the back of the house, the curtains are drawn, the shades are pulled, and Dogtown is left to a dignity of witches.
Our next storytellers are a duo. First, Thom Smoker, originally from Pennsylvania, has lived in Rockport with his husband Andrew Hankinson for the past 8 years. He earned a master's in music and vocal performance from the Boston Conservatory of Music. In addition to performing across New England, he has taught at Endicott College, served as choral teacher at Pingree School in Hamilton, and was assistant professor of voice at Berklee College of Music. And this year, he's excited to be working in his home community as choral director in the Rockport Public Schools, which means he gets to share an office with me. A bonus for me, not necessarily. And Andrew Hankinson originally hails from northern Vermont, went to Oberlin College, and now lives in Rockport with his husband and 3 small dogs. He has spent a great deal of his life involved with music and theater and loves the world building that comes with storytelling. He's excited to share this evening with all of you. And as you've seen, the things that go bump in the night are not always what we may expect. And sometimes the things that go bump in the night are our very relationships.
Do you want to move closer?
That's up to you.
You feel? Figuring this out.
I didn't include your name.
Oh, we'll talk about that later. Haven't we all had those moments where we receive a phone call at 10 o'clock at night from our parents. It's the dead of winter, and you expect to hear that they are stranded somewhere on the road as they are trying to travel to your wedding the next day. Unfortunately, they call. They've already been on the road for 10 hours, across 3 state lines, and are somewhere in upper state New York. And they are calling because they're not sure whether or not they're going to come or not. I'm like, what do you mean you're not sure you're going to come or not? Well, we've just been talking about it, and we don't believe that we should be there if we don't believe in the wedding itself. I was like, well, okay, this is a conversation we can have. You're certainly welcome to figure this out and have a conversation back and forth. Whatever you feel like you want to do is fine by me, but maybe not tell us about it the night before we're supposed to get married. So I help them to say, whatever you need to do, you make the decision that feels right to you. I thought I had prepared them for this moment in time with Andrew and I. I thought I had given them plenty of time to figure things out and see how they lived with it. I spent 30 years keeping it a secret. 7 of those years, I pretended to live as housemates with my openly gay best friend. I also waited till my dad had retired from being at the pulpit. And then I also, after sharing that I had come out to them and that Andrew and I were in a relationship, I waited 3 years before we decided to have this ceremony, hoping that that was enough time for them to come around and at least be accepting of the moment. So it was a little bit of a surprise to hear that they were debating after already traveling so far. But here we are. I was just so excited about having this moment, sharing our new family, our community, and our faith community that we had built here in Massachusetts.
Weddings are complicated. Weddings are complicated for the people participating, and weddings are complicated for the people who are connected to the people participating. As the fiancé at the time, it was really hard to watch Thomas go through this journey and then to arrive at the night before. And my attitude was, frankly, if they don't want to come, I'm fine with that. We had spent months, like everyone does, planning a service that we were really excited about, and in so many ways had tried to honor them and make them feel comfortable and understanding. It was a very church-heavy service. We had 2 pastors. We had a choir and instrumentalists, and we had scriptural readings that revolved around faith and family. And we were going to use Thom's mother's recipe for communion bread. Had selected a song that he knew she loved for our choir to sing. And we had scrapped the idea of the leather angel's wings from P-Town. So we felt that we had really gone above and beyond to share with them our life and hopefully, begin to build a relationship of honesty and openness. And Thomas has 3 siblings, and their marriages were all honored in a particular way. So we arrived at the day of.
It's the next morning. We're getting ready. I get another phone call. They have decided they are indeed coming to the wedding, and they are on their way and hopefully should make it in time for the ceremony. So we go about the rest of our activities of the day. We had 22 people staying in our house, family and friends. We were staying in Andrew's grandmother's house, who was had passed away earlier that year, and we were trying to sell the house. So it was this empty place, but place for everyone to just throw their stuff down, blow up some air mattresses, and go on. So we were moving about. All of a sudden, the realtor calls and says we have a showing to do. Can we add one more thing that's outside of the normal activities of a wedding day? I don't know. So we scurry about picking up all of our stuff, all of us, and go out the garage and channel out as the potential buyers are walking into the front door. We're like sneaking by. And we go about the rest of our day figuring out and planning the work that needed to be done. What's great about having a wedding on New Year's Eve and an 8 o'clock wedding is that you can have time to take a nap in the early evenings. This unfortunate part of taking a nap is that it gives your brain a chance to think of all the things you've forgotten to do. And in that moment, I had woken up in a startled state. Andrew, I didn't make communion bread. It's 6 o'clock, and we don't have any bread for communion. I scurry about making it. Thankfully, it was unleavened bread, so it was quick to make. Andrew's mother got it out of the stove and brought it over. It was the freshest communion bread you could have at a service.
So now we're in the service, and Tom's parents do make it and plant themselves right in the front row. So at the moment of communion, our church happens to have 2 aisles. So Thomas and an officiant went to one aisle, and myself and the other officiant went to the other aisle. You guys probably all know Mike Duda. He's from Rockport. So we go our separate ways, and I, of course, end up planted in front of his parents with Mike. And so our church has this super wide open welcome. It was not like a communion to isolate or that anyone should feel awkward taking part in. And so he does the wide open welcome and sort of the call. And, normally the first row stands up, and Thomas's parents do not stand up. So now I'm sweating at the front. Thankfully, the people around them figure out that there's a problem, and the rest of the people stand up, and we go through the whole thing. And then at the very last moment, as I'm getting ready to step away, I'm holding the hot communion bread. Tom's mother stands up and steps around his dad and comes and takes communion. And this was like a kind of a first moment of parental defiance. I don't know. Anyway, so that was one piece.
So we get to the celebration. We're partying, it's all together, but my parents decide that that is not a place that they would like to be a part of. So here is an opportunity. I was hoping for them to be able to meet our community, meet our friends, and socialize and see what our world was about, and they decided that was not for them. So we just partied, and friends brought art, live performances as gifts instead, and if they didn't want to do live performance, they were able to bring Home Depot gift cards for the new house we had just purchased here in Rockport. So, hey, and so that was the way we celebrated the night, and it was lovely, but they missed out on that opportunity.
The following morning, we had family brunch at dear friends' houses. Everyone from out of town was invited, and they also declined that honor. So we go to start to clean up the reception the day after, and I get another phone call. This time, they're calling to ask if they can be of help. And so they come and join in Andrew's family, and we spend the afternoon and all evening together cleaning up the reception, sharing stories about the evening prior, and laughing and having a good time. And it was the first time that there was a moment of seeing that community can be built in so many different kind of ways. I was hoping that through the ceremony of it, through this whole event, that they would come to see what our family and social life was like here, but it can also come through service and spending time. And so I hadn't even planned or thought about that aspect of it, but they had gotten to spend time with Andrew's family, and we had dinner together, and it just ended in being this wonderful time of a new start to our relationship.
These boys are tall. Okay. Our next storyteller is Meagan Fratiello. She's a member of Actors Equity and SAG-AFTRA. a writer who has had a tiny love story published in the New York Times, and a playwright with a piece in this year's Boston Theater Marathon. She has degrees from Bates and Emerson College and has lived in Gloucester for the past 10 years. Meagan.
Hi. God, there's a lot of you. My heart's beating so fast. For me, the thing that has always gone bump in the night has been mortality. When I was a kid growing up in the 70s, listening to a lot of AM radio, there was a song, it was by Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and When I Die, maybe you know it. Don't want to go by the devil, don't want to go by the demon, don't want to go by the Savior. Well, God, neither do I. I hated that song. Over the years and the decades that followed, I've lost people and pets, friends and loved ones. And I have never found a way to make peace with that. Until recently. On the morning of July 17th, my beautiful dog, Cosette, was running in the waves and having an absolutely wonderful time. Later that afternoon, I saw her take one bad step and lose her balance for 1/2 of 1 second. But I knew something was very, very wrong. We got her to the emergency room, and within about an hour, she had been diagnosed with hemangiosarcoma, and they had found a very large mass on her spleen. She was in emergency surgery to save her life later that night. At one point, the veterinarian came in and said, "The bleed is very bad, and we can't figure out where it's coming from, and we may not be able to save her." So we gathered our thoughts and tried to prepare to say goodbye. And as we were, the vet came back. And she said, "I found it. You can take her home in the morning." And so we did. For the next 5 months, we lived together on very sacred, very beautiful, very borrowed time. On the morning of December 8th, Cosette and I went down to the beach as we always did. She came back. I put her breakfast down, and she looked at me and she said, "Mama, I have to go." And later that night, she did. I grieved with my whole soul. I had no idea how to be in the world without her. I had all of these shipments set up to come, toys and food and supplements, treats. And I couldn't bear the thought of them coming now. But I also couldn't log on to her Chewy.com account to cancel each one of them. I couldn't do it. So I wrote a note to Chewy and I said, could you please could you cancel them all? And they wrote back and said, of course, we are so sorry. A few weeks after that, I got a delivery of roses from Chewy. Long stem. They were in a vase, not a vase. They were in a vase, and the vase had a note, and the note was beautiful. Eventually, I dried the flowers, I put the vase away. And after a while, I realized that I couldn't live without a dog. I knew I wasn't ready to adopt, I wasn't ready for that, but I thought, well, maybe I could foster. And if I foster, I want to foster old dogs, not puppies. I want to foster old dogs because I had adopted a 10-year-old dog named Donovan, and loving him changed my life. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I applied to the local shelter. They accepted me and said, sure, we need people to do that. I didn't hear anything for the longest time, and then one day the phone rang, and they said, are you ready? And I said, no, but yes. So I got in the car, and as I was driving to the shelter, I imagined the dog that was waiting for me, that had been picked for me. With a frosted face and probably maybe a little overweight and perfectly imperfect. When I got to the shelter, that dog was not there. There was a lot of barking, and there were a lot of puppies. So many puppies. And I walked in, and the woman looked at me and said, oh my goodness, thank goodness you're here. Wasn't sure you were coming. Which one do you want? What? Which one? Which puppy do you want? And I said, oh, no. Hi. I'm the person that I'm the old dog foster. That's what I am doing, and that's why I'm here. There's an old dog here somewhere for me, and she looked at me and said, okay, great. We don't have an old dog. We have puppies. Do you think you could find it in your heart to foster a puppy? As this is happening, to my right, I hear and then I see paws and a face. And there's a baby gate that's holding off the office, and on that baby gate is a little black and white spotted puppy with ears to the ceiling and a permanent black eyebrow raised over one eye. And she looks at me and she smiles. And the woman says, come on, let's go up, let's get your puppy, let's pick your puppy. I'm like, okay. So up we go, and I look at kennel after kennel after kennel, and I can't get the old dog that's supposed to be there out of my head. We come back down, and she says, okay, which one do you want? And I look down to the puppy that is still there. And I said, who's that? And she said, oh, well, yeah, so that's Abigail. If you want an old dog, you don't want Abigail. She's the youngest puppy we have. She's 3 months old. She is not house trained. She's got a lot of sass and a lot of spunk, and so I was like, okay, yep, okay. So I took her home. And I adopted her a week later. Sometime after that, my husband said to me, you should look at that vase. I said, what vase? The vase from Chewy, you should look at the vase. Why? Just look at it. So I found it, because I'd kept it. And the note on the vase was as beautiful as I had remembered. Losing a family member is so hard. We are sending you so much love in this difficult time. And it was signed Abigail and your Chewy family. I was in the grocery store the other day in the pet food aisle. And I heard that song again. But this time it didn't scare me because this time I knew it was from Cosette. And when I die, and when I'm gone, there'll be one dog born in this world to carry on, to carry on. Thank you.
Many of you probably know this, but for actors, this is a important and historical space, and I'd like to give Meagan a shout out for her debut up here. Our next storyteller is Brian King. Brian King is a songwriter, the lead singer in the band What Time Is It, Mr. Fox, and the creator of Medusa Reclaimed, which had one of its first performance iterations here at the Gloucester Stage Company before its run at the Museum of Science in Boston. By day, he works at the North Shore Health Project as a case manager for people living with HIV/AIDS. Please welcome Brian King.
Hello. So I went on a date last Friday. Guy from Beverly in his mid-50s, good looking, educated. He recently came out of the closet. He was raised in a very conservative evangelical household, so it took a little while. But, you know, we had that fear of God and hell and all that. But the date was going really well, and we started talking about writing and poetry, and I brought up the Gloucester Writers Center. And as I was describing where it's located, he said, "Oh, it's right near that weird satanic church." So then I started explaining, well, it's not a satanic church, it's run by this artist, philosopher named Richon. He said, no. No, I was told that people worship the devil there. Some rumors never die. But that brought me back to 40 years ago when my cousin Nicole told me that same story. I was probably 10 or 11. She said, my friend Sherry lives across the street from that satanic church in East Gloucester. She sees them at night walking the streets in their black cloaks. They sacrifice children there. And the police don't do anything about it because they're part of the same cult. I was terrified. And remember, this was during the satanic moral panic of the 1980s, when talk show hosts, therapists, police, politicians were perpetuating this modern witch hunt that resulted in countless, thousands actually, documented but unsubstantiated accusations of satanic ritual abuse. It was an exciting time. My cousin Nicole also taught me about necromancy. If done correctly, you can stand in front of a mirror and you can conjure the ghost of a certain 16th century British queen. You know who I'm talking about. Don't say her name out loud. Unless you're ordering brunch. So one dark October night, I remember Nicole running out of the bedroom and screaming, "I saw her in the mirror! She reached out and scratched my face! Who? Bloody Mary!" I had to see myself. I walked into that pitch black room right up to the dresser, carefully following Nicole's every instruction. I peered into that black mirror. I mustered all the venom I could. "I hate you, Bloody Mary. I hate you, Bloody Mary." And then I lit the candle. And my reflection was suddenly engulfed in a forest of flames. And then in a flash, the fire was gone. And I think I lost 10 years off my life. Nicole was in the other room laughing. She had sprayed the mirror with Aquanet hairspray. So it just ignited when I lit the candle. Jerk. But after that, I have to say, I was hooked on the occult. Friends would come over to my house after school, and we'd have seances and readings from the Necronomicon. We'd burn black candles, and we'd play with the Ouija board. "You're moving it." "No, I swear I'm not." "Which one of us is going to die first?" Kathy. Why? "It's you, Kathy!" "When?" "Goodbye." Kathy ran into the bathroom and cried for an hour. I think she works for Disney now, actually. But just like Kathy, I was freaked out by that Ouija board. I started having nightmares and panic attacks, thinking we'd conjured some ancient demon. So I called up my Aunt Ginger for advice. Picture mid-40s, hippie, witchy lesbian. She was probably stoned. "Aunt Ginger, we've been playing with the Ouija board, and I know this sounds really stupid, but I'm afraid we might have, awakened some evil poltergeist, and I really don't want to get possessed. So, what do you think we should do?" Ouija board. It's a game, right? Yeah, it's a board, and it has letters and numbers, and you ask spirits questions, and then they spell out the answers. All right. So, what do you think these spirits know that your own spirit doesn't know? My own spirit? Yeah, if you think we're all one or interconnected, why would one spirit have more power or wisdom than your own? My anxiety melted away. I felt really empowered by that idea. My own spirit, my own power, my own wisdom, my own authority. We were trying to connect with this entity out there, but why would that know better? So back to the date. I really appreciate the courage it took for this guy to come out after so many years. But I am so grateful that this one conversation with my aunt gave me 40 years of life where I can confidently say, I'm not scared of the devil. Thank you.
We have one storyteller left, and I'll bet you can guess who he is. Nathan is a multi-instrumental performer. a composer and conductor, the director of orchestras for the Rockport Public Schools, and an adjunct professor of music at Endicott College, where he directs the chamber music ensemble. He is a co-founder and member of the band What Time Is It, Mr. Fox, with Brian, and most importantly, he's the father of my grandchildren. So, Nathan.
When I was in high school, we had one rule in my family, and that was that my name was not to appear in the police notes. I'd like you to picture me the summer of my senior year, tattered tie-dye shirt, blue shorts, also tattered, bushy mutton chops shaved to slightly different lengths, not on purpose. That summer, my friend Nick, who is from Florida, and John Christie's son, he was staying with us that whole summer, and our buddy Ben had come over, and the three of us were going to a gathering across the street from my house. Another high school friend of mine, his parents were out of town for the weekend. And we headed over there, and before we even got in the door, we realized that this was the kind of party that was for sure going to be busted by the police. In the front lawn, within view of my parents' living room where they were watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, there were teenagers smoking things from big glass bongs. And we were young men who made good choices. So we decided, actually, instead of going to this party, we were going to enjoy each other's company. We took in the night air. We went for a walk into the night, and we were about 15-minute walk up High Street, and that is a geographical location and not a state of mind, when a police cruiser came speeding up behind us with its lights on, and the floodlight came on and froze us, and we were terrified. And what we pictured was that the police had already busted this party, and we imagined teens pouring into the Gloucester night, and this was the police driving around Lanesville and picking up the rabble. And that's what we thought until two more cruisers sped up behind. It was backup. And a crackly voice came over the loudspeaker, and it said, you, it wasn't quite that aggressive. You in the tie-dye shirt and the blue shorts, and that was me, right? Step away from the others. And between the three cars and that request, it became clear that I was being picked up for something that I had not done. And I was very relieved, and I was also kind of excited because this was going to be an adventure, I thought, and maybe a story that I could share someday. And I realize now, in retrospect, what an incredibly naive testament to my white privilege that is, but that's another story. And the police officer invited me into the back of the cruiser, and Nick and Ben stepped forward, and you think you have good friends, but you don't really know how good your friends are until they are tested. And Nick and Ben said, "Excuse me, officer, can we come too?" And the police officer drove all three of us just a few blocks away to a woman's house. They asked me to step out of the car. And a woman came to the front door of the house, opened the door, came out, and said, "No, officer, that's not the guy." Back into the car. And this is where things took a turn, because the officer turned to me and said, "Son, where do you live? I'd like to drive you home." And I said, "That won't be necessary. We live just up around the corner. We can walk." And he said, No, I'd like to drive you home. I'd like to speak to your parents." "Officer, that really, really, really will not be necessary." "No, I insist. I would like to tell your mother what a good boy you are." And I did like his reasoning. But I said, "No, sir, I am really confident that I can convey that message on your behalf. You don't need to trouble yourself." But he insisted, and I will never forget the look on my mother's face when she woke up on the couch in the night to learn that there was a police officer on our patio. And I will never forget the look in my mother's eyes when she surveyed the scene in her purple bathrobe with the penguins and ascertained that we were physically safe and seemingly not under arrest. And at this point, she said, "Boys, get in the house, you are grounded." And the officer said, "No, ma'am, I just wanted to tell you what a good boy your son is." And my mother said, "I don't care." We have a rule in our house that if the police bring my son home, he is grounded. Now, I was aware of one rule in our house, and that was not the rule. I would later find out what I was picked up for. The police had picked me up for the suspected crime of stealing a handful of pennies from the car that was parked in front of that woman's house. And I found this information out by reading the police notes in the Gloucester Daily Times. By and large, I am a person who does and did obey rules. And I would like to have you know that my name did not appear in those police notes, and that I make good choices. I would like to invite all of our storytellers up onto the stage for a last bow, if you would come up this way. And while they're coming up, I want to say a huge thank you to the Gloucester Stage Company and Gloucester Writers Center and Henry and to Ryan in the booth and to Chris and to Jennifer, the incredible volunteer for the Writers Center. Thank you all so much for being here and for supporting storytelling and this community.
And nothing to last.